What is happening, everybody? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast here on YouTube. My name is Andy Herman. Today I am going to be going over the edge rusher or outside linebacker or pass rusher position, however you want to take a look at it. And honestly, there is a lot that I want to get to within this position that is very, very intriguing. So let's get things started right away. And I think the best way to start off this conversation about the Packers edge rusher position is we don't 100% know yet if this is a 4-3 outside, defensive end, or if this is a 3-4 outside linebacker. And the difference between 4-3 and 3-4 at this point and the conversations that people like to have about it are 95% irrelevant because for the most part, about 80% of defenses are either in nickel or dime. If you're Green Bay, it's been even higher than that over the course of the last handful of seasons, I think even longer than that. But so, what you play is your, 4-3 or 3-4 base defense. Base defense is nickel and dime now, right? So how you play some of those oddball situations in today's NFL doesn't ultimately matter all that much. But it does matter when you start looking at what type of players Green Bay wants to keep around if you are, in fact, going to move to a 4-3 type system. More importantly, how you fill your gaps and what players on the outside, are they going to put their hands in the ground or are they going to be standing up? So there are some, definitely some nuances there that would matter dependent upon how Joe Barry wants to set up his defense. I still think it more likely than not that Green Bay is going to stick with their 3-4 defense. But you could actually make a fairly decent argument that Kenny Clark, Zadaria Smith, and Rashaan Gary, the three most important players in their front seven, would all fit better in a 4-3 defense. And even like if you want to go like Chris Barnes, Kamal Martin, it doesn't matter one way or the other to them if you're 3-4 or 4-3. Kirksey fits fine in a 4-3. Jonathan Garvin fits better in a 4-3. So you can actually make a fairly decent argument that the personnel that Green Bay has on their roster at this moment would fit better in a 4-3 personnel. So I think we need to start there just saying flat out, we don't know what type of defense Green Bay wants to play. And again, for the most part, it doesn't matter, right? Rashaan Gary, Zadaria Smith are going to be rushing the passer off the edges. Whether their hand is in the ground or whether they're standing up probably is mostly irrelevant. It does affect Kenny Clark some. We'll maybe go over that a little bit more on the defensive line episode. But overall, it is still a question that we don't exactly know the answer to. And I think it's at least worth addressing at the onset here. So let's go over what Green Bay has on the roster. And we have to start by talking about Zadaria Smith, right? Zadaria Smith, both by Pro Football Focus's standard and by my standard, again, when I'm going through and grading every player on every play throughout the course of the season, same as Pro Football Focus does, two totally different grading systems, two totally different graders, both PFF and I had Zadaria Smith as the player who regressed the most from 2019 to 2020. No other player. Number one on both of our lists was Zadaria Smith. Now, a part of that was the absolutely inhuman season that Zadaria Smith had in 2019. He had a ridiculous season where he was one of the best defensive players in football. In fact, I think you could actually make an argument that in 2019, he may have been the best defensive player in football. He was that good. He's at least in the conversation. In 2020, he was good. He was good, but he wasn't great. I don't even know that you could say he was really good. It was almost like a home run hitter in baseball where he hit some home runs, but he struck out a lot. He didn't hit for average. He couldn't get on base. That's the type of season that Zadaria Smith had, where if you're just watching as maybe more of a casual fan or, just kind of tuning in and maybe watching the overall scheme of things, you'll see him make some of those flash plays. The play he made against the Saints, forcing the Taysom Hill fumble, a game-changing play in that game. Really, in a way, a season-changing, because if they lose to the Saints, who knows how that messes up the playoff seedings later. Maybe they would have done better. Who knows? But, ultimately, that was a huge play, and he had multiple of those throughout the course of the season where you still saw the sacks and some of the forced fumbles and some of the impact plays show up, but on a down-to-down basis. He was not, always, taking care of his run gaps responsibilities. He would, kind of fly by and let his area go completely unguarded. There would be downs where he was getting no penetration or, no pass rush whatsoever. And this was more indicative of what Zadaria Smith was throughout his time with the Ravens. A good player that certainly helps your team, but nowhere near the game-changing impact player that he was in 2019 that completely changed the face of that Packers defense. So the biggest question that we're going to have going into 2021 is, what Zadaria Smith do we see in 2021? Was 2019 a fluke? Was 2020 more the, what we should expect? Is it, likely it's something in the middle. I still think Z has more to give than he had, what he gave last season. I think injuries played a part in that. And I think if he's totally healthy, you're going to see something in between what we saw in both of those seasons. I don't think it's ever fair to put the expectations of what Z did in 2019. I wouldn't put those expectations on any player in the league. Maybe Aaron Donald. Like that's the type of season he had in 2019. That's what I would expect out of Aaron Donald this upcoming season. I don't know if there's any other player in the league I would stack those type of expectations on, but if he can get back to that, it changes everything. If he can be even better than he was last season, that helps. But if he's just a, solid to good to maybe really good outside linebacker, that definitely takes away a major piece of your defense and what it was with 2019 with the impact that Zadaria Smith, was giving the Packers. So I think that's really 1A is what type of play does Green Bay get from Zadaria Smith in 2021? And then, of course, the next player on the list is Rashaan Gary. And, where is his ceiling? How fast can he get to that ceiling? Can he get to that ceiling? I saw stuff from Rashaan Gary at the end of the year that has me insanely excited. And if you remember, if you want to go back in time, was not super pumped about the Rashaan Gary pick. Kind of went back on that a little bit after as I went back and watched a little bit more tape. But I thought he had a really nice training camp in 2019, but then, didn't really follow it up in the season. 2020, there were certainly some signs. And then towards the end of the year, that's what had me salivating, because in 2019 and early 2020, we would see a couple flash plays here and there, but he couldn't string things together. You go back and watch towards the end of 2020, and you would start seeing him stack success. You would start seeing him, put moves on top of moves and start stringing together a game plan on how you get to the quarterback. That's what had me so excited about Rashaan Gary, and he's still such a physical specimen that he's still going to be able to set the edge and be a good run defender too. Now the question is, why was Green Bay not using him ahead of Preston Smith when Preston Smith was struggling so much? Why were they limiting him around that 40 snap mark? Do they not think that, he can hold up to the rigors of, 60, 65 snaps, game in and game out throughout the course of a season? Do they not think he was ready? Can he handle that type of workload? So this is really a major season for Rashaan Gary, regardless of who's back, regardless of how this shapes up. This is the season that you really want to see, because he went from, understudy in 2019 to really good, really solid player in 2020. Now, can you make that jump to impact player? That's what you're looking for Rashaan Gary. And if you want a player that has the ability to kind of change the Packers' fortunes to, and get them over that hump to get to the Super Bowl, Rashaan Gary might be 1A on that list because his ceiling is so high and he has the ability to be a game-changing force off of the edge. Can he reach that? That's going to be the next thing really to keep an eye on this upcoming season. And then, of course, we've got to talk about Preston Smith. I still do not see in any way, shape, or form how Preston Smith can be back in 2021 unless he makes a major restructure of his contract. And if I were Preston Smith's agent, I wouldn't do that, because what do so if Green Bay cuts him, he basically loses $8 million this season in that. And I think if you're Preston Smith, if you go on the open market, I think he at least gets $6 million on the open market. Maybe I'm off there, but I think he at minimum gets $6 million this season on the open market. And if you're Green Bay, even if you restructure and cut a couple million off, I don't think that's enough. I really don't think that's enough. And here's another thing that you have to keep in mind with Preston Smith, because everyone's been talking about you save $8 million if you release Preston Smith, right? We've heard that number over and over and over. It's actually more than that, unless he restructures. So let's say he keeps his salary the way that it is. What you would end up doing is paying Preston Smith $16 million this year. He would get his full contract this season at $16 million. And then you would still owe him $4 million more to the salary cap, against the salary cap next year, because he has $4 million in signing bonus next year. So what you end up doing is actually paying $20 million in total cap hit for 1 season of Preston Smith, because he's getting cut in 2022 no matter what. Even if he were to be back this year, there's no way he's back next year based on how his contract's structured. So he's getting cut next year. And when you do that, you're taking the $4 million cap hit next year. Add that to the $16 million that you would be paying him this year for a full season, and you end up paying $20 million for 1 year of Preston Smith. If you cut him now, you pay $8 million for no Preston Smith. So you actually save over the course of this year and next year $12 million in salary cap space by releasing Preston Smith. And even if he cuts a couple million off of that deal by restructuring, in no way, shape, or form do I think it's worth keeping him around in that situation. And they need every dollar that they can get to kind of fill out their roster and make it more well-balanced, especially when you've got a guy like Rashaan Gary who should be ready to come up and take that starter role. So in no way, shape, or form can I imagine a situation in which Preston Smith is back unless he massively restructures, which again, if I were his agent, I would tell him not to take the release, take your $8 million, and then see what you can get on the open market, because I think that's going to ultimately be a better deal for you. So we'll see what happens there, but I just can't fathom a way in which Preston Smith is back this upcoming season. Although I will note, I don't know why they've kept him up to this point when they released Christian Kirksey and when they released their recent players, and Rick Wagner, I should say. I don't know why they didn't release him then. So the fact that they at least kept him past that makes me wonder if maybe they do have plans for him. But I'm sitting here today, I would be shocked if Preston Smith is a Packer in 2021. All right, rounding out the rest of the roster, Jonathan Garvin, Tipa Nalier, and then Randy Ramsey. Randy Ramsey is an exclusive rights free agent. Those are usually just easy bringbacks because it's no guaranteed money on a minimum deal. If you don't keep him, you cut him in off the 53 whenever you're ready to do so at cutdown time. But I would expect him to be brought back at least on that exclusive rights free agent deal. So you've got Garvin, Nalier, and Ramsey probably fighting for that number 4 and maybe number 5 spot, along with maybe a late draft pick or an undrafted free agent, something like that. So those guys will fight that out. I actually really do like Jonathan Garvin and Tipa Naliai. Now, if it's a 4-3, Tipa has almost no role. He's too undersized for a 4-3 defensive end, and he doesn't really fit as an off-ball linebacker, so that would definitely be detrimental to him. Garvin can play either, but I actually think he'd be better as a 4-3 defensive end. The big thing with Garvin is he doesn't have a ton of special teams value, unlike, maybe a Naliai and a Ramsey might have. So Garvin has to almost win that number 3 or win a position where he would actually be seen playing time on defense in order to make him active. If not, that really puts him behind the 8 ball. But I actually liked Garvin when he was on the field last year. I think he has something to offer, and I think he could take a step this year. I think it would be a stretch to say that he could be their number 3. I think he could be a real number 4 with Tipa as a number 5. And then where do you go with that number 3 position? Again, this is assuming that Preston Smith is released. And I was just kind of thinking this through. And for those of you who follow me on Twitter, you know where I'm going with this already. But an interesting name to me. And before I say the name even, I want you to start realizing that Green Bay is going to have to fill out a bunch of their roster with minimum type salary players. And one of those minimum type salary players that I know is not a sexy name, and I know is maybe going to earn me a couple dislikes, and maybe you're going to log off as soon as you hear that, but is a guy like Kyler Fackrell. And am I excited about Kyler Fackrell? I am not super excited about Kyler Fackrell. However, if you are playing like a 3-4 defense, having Kyler Fackrell as that number 3 behind Gary and Zadaria Smith, a player who can actually drop back in coverage if you're in a 3-4 and has done a good job of it, probably better than what Preston was a season ago. A player like that on like a $1.25 million deal to kind of round out your roster, who knows the team, who knows the players around him, who played better, in my opinion, in 2019 than Preston Smith did in 2020. By the way, PFF graded Kyler Fackrell better than Preston Smith this year as well. So I don't think it's totally out of the realm of possibility that you could maybe add a player like that as a rotational number 3 edge rusher behind Za'Darius and behind Rashaan Gary. Now, of course, if you're going to go out and eventually end up with like a J.J. Watt or something, especially if you're in a 4-3, now you've got an interesting rotation going because Watt could play inside or outside. You could do a variety of different things in that situation and scenario, and maybe then you're okay with Jonathan Garvin as a 4, something like that. So there's a variety of different ways that this could go, but a name, I'm not saying it has to be Kyler Fackrell. In fact, I'm saying that probably the odds of Kyler Fackrell coming back are probably 5% or less, but those are the type of names that we need to start registering, because Green Bay, like I said, I think is going to have one home run swing this offseason to take a chance at somebody, but the rest is going to be these minimum deals, like a Lane Taylor along the offensive line, right? Like potentially a Kyler Fackrell type player as an edge rusher. And I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. We just have to kind of grow accustomed to, they're not going to go out and hand out a ton of money to 3 or 4 big, high price free agents like they did prior to the 2019 season. That's going to do it for me for this edge rusher, pass rusher, defensive end, whatever you want to call it, edition of the Pack a Day podcast here on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure to check out today's audio podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.